So we might get started because people are fast and furiously joining the Zoom room for this morning. So hello everyone, I'm Deb Sabaris. Before we open for day 2 of our Open Symposium, I have the pleasure of introducing Kelly Hunter, who will welcome us to country via video recording today.
Malimangu naranik Kelly. Waranjeri boyrorang ik. Waranjeri kanamulambalakut boyrorang ik. Nungujan womanyat bikdui ik. Welcome, greetings, how are you all? My name is Kelly and my people are the Wurundjeri of the Woiwurrung. My inner mob are the Gunnerwillumballak. I thank you all for being here on country. I'd like to acknowledge my Gugum and my Mumun Mamun, my grandmother and my father, who have instilled in me my pride in who I am today, in my Aboriginality and my culture. I pay my respects to Luwik, Balak, Nugalik, my ancestors, elders, past, present, and future. The very first footprints on this continent were those belonging to First Nations people. Our nation's story began at the dawn of time. Our people were the first to endure climate change, catastrophic droughts, and rising sea levels. Our ancestors were first to explore, navigate, and farm. They were the first astronomers, artists, scientists. We invite all Australians to embrace the true history of this country, a history that dates back thousands of generations. We ask you to see, to hear, and to learn the First Nations' 65,000 plus year history. We want all Australians to celebrate that we have the oldest continuing cultures on the planet and to recognise that our sovereignty was never ceded. As I walk on country, it will continue to resonate with me and my future generation that it always was and always will be a spiritual and cultural connection to country for many First Nations people.
It's always a very moving piece from Kelly. I'd like to also acknowledge that I'm on Wurundjeri land of the Great Kulin Nation. I'd like to encourage you to all do the same and tell us which lands you are from in the chat. I want to pay my respect to elders, past and present, and recognise our Aboriginal colleagues who are with us today in this symposium and their vital work with children and families across Victoria. It's been a really, really difficult couple of weeks, and there has been great sadness. So I want to take a moment for us all to take a moment about the last couple of weeks, and the work must go on to support Aboriginal First Nations people across this country to have their rightful place in the Constitution. I also want to take a moment to recognise the wisdom and perspectives of Aboriginal people and communities as we work together to improve the lives of children, young people and families. When it comes to working together as a learning system, who better to look toward than Aboriginal cultures who've been operating as a living system of knowledge and learning for over 65,000 years. Thank you very much. So how great has this year's Open Symposium been so far? Yesterday, we heard from Dr. Henry Thurrow, the Director of the Early Intervention Research Directorate, who shared the importance of evidence-based early intervention responses to allow children and their families to get effective early help. We also heard from VACA about the great results from the Koori Kids Supported Playgroups program. And we were lucky to be joined by Associate Professor Brian Chapman from Melbourne University, who shared his insights on artificial intelligence in healthcare. There was also an insightful session on supporting foster carers, crucial at a time when attracting foster carers in Victoria and nationwide is more important than ever. So as we begin day 2, get ready for a lineup of sessions that promise to be as insightful and inspiring as yesterday's. Before we go any further, I'd like to thank our generous sponsors for this year's Open Symposium: Anglicare Victoria, Berry Street, Kids First Australia, Key Assets Australia, and CSNet. Events like these would not be possible without our key champions, and I thank each of these organisations for their ongoing commitment to improving the lives of Victorian children and families. Some small housekeeping reminders. We all have an opportunity for question and answer at the end of presentations, so please put your comments and questions in the chat and keep your mics on mute. And please note that this session is being recorded. If you have any tech issues throughout, please contact the wonderful Matt Edwards, whose number is on screen, and we'll also put that in the chat. Today we'll be hearing from the Victorian Aboriginal Children and Young People's Alliance about how they're working to improve systems for Aboriginal families. We have Berry Street, who will discuss their support services for children who have experienced neglect, a crucial topic, especially in light of the recent release of the finding from the Australian Childhood Maltreatment Study. We'll hear about the By5 Paediatric Project, an incredible partnership improving health and wellbeing of children throughout rural and remote Victoria. In the afternoon, we have a session dedicated to lived experience voices and young parents. The organisations presenting at the Open Symposium have undertaken practice-informed research, and they're here today to share their findings, but also the process of undertaking that work across different regions, different phases, different program areas and client groups. I really want to thank them for their time and willingness to share both the successes and the challenges. So I want to restate that as a peak body, we are committed to working alongside our sector, government, academia, as well as other sector peaks to build our shared knowledge of what works for children, young people and families. Open is an important vehicle for this work, and the Centre wants to find new avenues to share what works for children and families and offer support for organisations that are on their own journey to better outcomes, whatever their journey might be. This is why we're really excited to announce that the Centre for Excellence in Child and Family Welfare has relaunched the national journal Children Australia. So we're very excited about this today. With a 45-year history and various publishers, Children Australia is making a comeback. This revitalised journal will serve as a platform for sharing evidence and commentary from various contributors, including practitioners, researchers, and importantly, the children and young people we work with. It will foster connections between the sector and academic researchers, breaking down silos in knowledge. The journal will highlight diverse kinds of evidence, including practice evidence, reflections, and research, and provide the sector with their own formal knowledge communication vehicle. This will be the sector's journal, where all people involved in this sector can share and access best practice, commentary, evidence, research, and knowledge. To ensure accessibility, all published articles, including all previous Children Australia content, will be freely available on the journal's website, and there will be no publishing fees for authors. The journal's co-editors-in-chief, Professor Sharon Bissell, Dr. Dave Vickery, and Associate Professor Tim Moore, who we'll be hearing from in just a few minutes, along with an editorial board of more than 25 members from across Australia, will drive this effort. With this relaunch, Children Australia steps into a new era, ready to promote collaboration, innovation, and knowledge exchange for the benefit of our sector. and the children and young people and families we work with. I'm breathless and I've got goosebumps. Anyway, Children Australia's new web address is now live and submissions are now open for issue 1 of the relaunched journal, which will be published in the first 6 months of this year. You can find further information on the journal's homepage. So as you can tell, I'm beyond excited. Our senior editor, Melissa Story, is available to answer questions or provide support. And she's here on the screen, so give everybody a wave, Melissa. We're really looking forward to running a Children Australia online event later in November. Look out for the announcements about this in the open newsletter and everywhere else. And I've got Melissa on screen and I've got Tim on screen, and I'd like to ask them to just say a few words because we are all very excited about today.
Am I going first?
Go first, Tim. You go first.
Nice. Can I join with Deb in saying this is an absolute amazing progress? The journal's going to be a real space for us to not only learn more about what research is telling us around how we can provide supports to children, young people and families, but really be a place for dialogue and debate. One of the things that Sharon and Dave, both of whom wanted to be with you today, but weren't able to, so they send their apologies. But the three of us are incredibly excited because one of the things that we talked about right from the start was that we wanted it to be a place where we hear not only from academics, but also where there's space for practitioners like yourselves, but excitedly for me, a space for where children, young people and families can actually also contribute. So we want to hear from those with lived experience. We want to hear from those who are working with children, young people and families about what's working, what's not working, what they think might need to change, and also from academics who are doing work across Australia. So I'm delighted. I want to join with Deb in saying, please, 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 not only sign up to the journal, but also think about how you can contribute. You know, if there are pressing things that you're saying, we're seeing this in our work and we want to shine a spotlight on it, we want to challenge others to do it in a similar way, please contribute, and we'll send out some more detail as to how best to do that. But I'm absolutely delighted and thrilled, and thank the Centre for this incredibly exciting initiative.
Thank you, Tim. Melissa, and we're very excited in that okay to be involved, because there's a lot of work involved in this, and so we're really absolutely stoked. So thank you. You do bring some things to this that I think are going to be quite amazing, particularly the voice and lived experience. You are a consummate expert at bringing voice into your research and into our sector. So you are going to be stellar at helping guide us do something maybe a little bit different than we even anticipated in the beginning. So I'm really, really grateful to be working with you on this. We're looking for something to work with you on, and here we go. Here we go. Now, Melissa, would you like to say a few words?
I'm sure. I'm jumping out of my skin with excitement this morning that it's live. It's very, very exciting, and I can't wait to see what happens. I'm thrilled that we have Tim Moore and Sharon Bassell and Dave Vickery as editor-in-chief. That's just really wonderful. And the team that are working alongside them, the editorial board, are all amazing as well. And there are a few of them here today. So thank you, everybody, for coming along. And thank you to the Centre. I'm just very, very excited to be working on this project. And yeah, it's very, very exciting. I'm excited.
Thank you, Melissa. And I do want to give a special shout out to Dr. Mandy Sharman, who all of you know. She makes this look easy, but a lot of the backroom work to make this happen, she did a lot of work, didn't she, Mel and Tim? And she gets often overlooked in these things, but I mean, even the sort of being able to get access to the back catalogue, Mandy did a lot of negotiations, and my hat goes off to you, Mandy. You make things that are difficult look easy. So thank you so much, my friend, for helping make this come alive, because it could have this opportunity could have slipped past us. So all props to you, Mandy, for making something that I really wanted happen. So thank you so much, my friend. All right, so get involved. Really exciting to be here today, and we will physically come together at some point and talk more about this journal and make sure that it is what you want it to be. So here we go. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our keynote for the day, and one of the star editors of Children Australia Journal, Associate Professor Tim Moore. Tim is Deputy Director at the Institute of Child Protection Studies. For more than 20 years, Tim has worked with children and young people to better understand their experiences of the system and the services that support them. During and since the life of the Royal Commission into institutional responses to child sexual abuse, Tim has led research that aims to better understand what children need to be safe and feel safe, and how adults and organisations can work in alliance with children to be more responsive to their needs. Welcome, Tim. I should call you Associate Professor Tim Moore.
No.
Nobody knows you. Thank you so much for being here with us today at this symposium. I might just throw to you, so we've got plenty of time to hear from you. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. And as Deb said, as I'm trying to get my system ready, I've been delighted to have lots of engagements with the centre over the years. I can't believe it, Deb. I was thinking about the other day, I think we met 18 years ago when we were both working in the homelessness area. And people, I'm sure, would agree with me. Deb doesn't look a day older, but I apparently do. I was sitting in a resi care service just the other week, and a young person walked past and called out to one of the workers and said, "Who's that fat old bastard in the sitting room?" And I looked around and went, "Oh, that's me." So it's lovely to be here with you to share my reflections as maybe an old fat bastard, but sharing with you some of the things that I learned from that young person and others around how we can best support children, young people and families, particularly in regards to improving their sense of safety. Can I join with Kelly and Deb and others in acknowledging the lands on which we meet? I too am on Wurundjeri country. I want to acknowledge elders past, present and emerging, and any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are here today. It's with great sadness that I reflect on the last couple of weeks, but recommit my personal commitment to working with and learning from Aboriginal communities across the country. If I reflect on my time, both as a researcher and as a youth worker, I was a youth worker for about 10 years prior to moving into academia. I have to say I've had great pleasure in working with communities across the country and learning from elders and others around how we can best support our kids. I was thinking about it in 2007, I think. I was involved in a project in the ACT. I noticed someone else was on Ngunnawal country. I conducted a piece of work with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander young people who were in care. And we wanted to find out how we could make the system more responsive to them. So as an ex-youth worker, I thought, okay, what we'll do is bring them all together. We'll go 2 hours outside of Canberra to a campsite and spend time with kids in groups, talking a bit about their lives and what they want and what they needed. Now, as a good youth worker, or good ex-youth worker, I said, your participation today is totally voluntary. So if you feel like you don't want to be here, that's okay. We'll organise to get you back to Canberra. As I was saying that, my colleague Moore said, we're not going to be able to do that, but we wanted to really make it clear to young people that it was up to them as to whether or not they participated or not. During one of the breaks, I was standing with an elder, Auntie Agnes Shea, and 3 big buffy boys, massive boys, came up to us and said, "Oh, look, Tim, you said before that if we didn't feel comfortable, we didn't have to stay. Well, we're kind of thinking that, we don't really belong here, because we were taken from our families when we were really young, and we've been in mostly white families ever since. And, we just don't know that we've got much to contribute." Auntie Agnes didn't say anything to start off with. She looked at the boys. Auntie Agnes is about 4.5 foot tall. She looked at the boys and went over to the biggest, buffiest boy and put her arms around his neck and said, "Welcome home. It's been too long. We've missed you. We're so delighted to have you back, and we want to hear your story." Well, the boys burst into tears. I burst into tears because it was this moment that was so incredibly special for them. Auntie Agnes was doing something that was so profound. She was saying, we you belong, we care for you, we love you, we respect you, we value you, we want to walk in alliance with you. Throughout the conversation that we're going to have today, I really wanted to reflect on some of that, about how we can do things. When over the last 10 years, we've been talking about child safe practices, but ultimately what we're trying to do is do what Auntie Agnes did in 3 seconds. We're able to send a message to children and young people that they're valued, that they're loved and cared about, that we're going to walk in alliance with them. So as Dem mentioned, I've had the absolute treat over the last 10 years at least to work with children and young people, talking to them about their sense of safety. We did the work for the Royal Commission that Deb mentioned, but since then we've also looked at, well, what does this mean in practice? When we engaged with the sector, a lot of workers and leaders said to us, well, the child safe standards and principles and the like are great because they help set the setting for good protective work, but really we're not quite sure what our workers should be doing. People are saying that the standards and the like really say these are the things you shouldn't be doing with children and young people. How can we reclaim good, ethical, relationship-based practice in the settings within which we work? So the ethical practices involving children study really focused on that. In addition, I've been really delighted to work with children and young people in Melbourne, in Adelaide and Mount Gambier and Western Australia, looking at their experiences of safety in the context of family violence and child protection engagement. I'm going to talk a little bit about that later too. And then over the last 2 years, I've been very involved with the Tasmanian Commission of Inquiry, and I'll send some links to some animations which will delve into some of the findings from those studies. But throughout all these studies, children and young people, as Deb referred to before, told us that it was important for us to think not only about how we protect kids from harm so that they are safe, but also how we create conditions where they feel safe. Children and young people felt that they were two different things, and that sometimes adults got a little bit overly excited about being safe, but weren't really thinking about what they were doing to create psychosocial safety for children and young people. In the Tasmanian context, we were asked to talk to young people in schools, in hospitals, in out-of-home care, and in youth detention. And children and young people in those settings told us that, unless they felt safe in those spaces, in the context of schools, they weren't going to learn. In the context of out-of-home care, they weren't going to have some space where they can heal and grow from their early trauma. In youth detention, they told us, how are we going to ever rehabilitate? And in hospital, they said, how are we ever going to recover? So we need to think about how we not only create conditions so that children are safe, but also feel safe too. So for children and young people, being safe is about the absence of risk. It's about knowing that you're not going to be abused, bullied, belittled, or threatened. But it's also about knowing that you're surrounded by people that are going to protect you, who have your back and who you trust. In our work with kids, children and young people who are experiencing family violence, most of the young people told us that it was family. Family was the key source of safety for them. And you can imagine their frustration when they had been removed from their families and placed into a system that they believed wasn't able to provide them with that sense of safety and stability that they so needed. And we know that for most kids. We know that most children and young people feel most safe at home, and it's for a number of reasons. Families are the ones who most often provide them with emotional support. They're the ones who connect them with community. They're the ones who help them develop their identity, and who give them some aspirations for the future. But we know, unfortunately, that for many families, particularly the ones where we're engaging children and young people, don't always experience safety. And we need to acknowledge that as well. I know that others today are going to talk a little bit about the Australian Childhood Maltreatment Study, but I think it's probably important to recognise that many of our children and young people are experiencing a whole range of different forms of maltreatment, and some of that, quite a lot of that, in fact, occurs within families. We know that within families, young people can be exposed to parental alcohol and other drug issues, parental mental illness, family and domestic violence, and child abuse and neglect. in this context, we also know that the reason why most young people end up in care is because there's an assumption that children and young people will be safer in care than what they would be at home. Whoops, sorry. We also know from research, particularly the work that I was talking about before in regards to family violence, that there's issues that happen intergenerationally that also affect children in their sense of place in the world, the stability and security. In the work that we did in South Australia and Western Australia, we talked not only to children and young people about what they want and what they need, but also to their parents, and in fact, in a couple of cases, their grandparents. And we saw in most of the situations that parents were still struggling with stuff that had happened to them when they were children and things that had happened to their grandparents when they were children. So across that sample, we heard a lot about intergenerational family violence. We heard lots about children and young people being removed from their families and placed in the system and then becoming parents themselves without the support and stability of a broad family network. One father said, you know, it's a three-peat trifecta. My parents abandoned me, my grandparents abandoned me, and the Child Protection Services abandoned me. So reality is that lots of the kids that we're working with across the child, youth and family support sector, you know, are living in families that are still experiencing their own trauma from childhood. So I don't know that we're very good at picking that up or responding to it. One of the things that came out of that study and some other work that we did looking at young people's aspirations towards parenting and relationships. So these were kids, young people who'd been in the out-of-home care or homelessness sector, were talking about how their own experience of childhood was also having an enduring impact on their lives. You know, I found it quite devastating talking to some young men who said, you know, because of my family background, I don't want to be a father. I'm scared about it. I'm scared that I'm going to be like my dad or my grandfather. So I'm not going to have kids. I'm not going to be in a relationship because I don't want to hurt anyone. Young men in that same study, though, some of them said, actually, you know, I believe that the only way that there can be healing, the only way that we can ensure that the next generation is okay is if people like me champion good fathering, good parenting. So he was adamant that he was not only going to be a kick-ass dad, but also was going to support his friends to do the same. Young women in that study, a number of them talked about the fact that they've been in violent families in the past, and that as they started to bond with you know, potential partners, that they had very low aspirations about those relationships. You know, some of them said, well, you know, what could I expect? You know, people like me don't deserve to have a healthy relationship. So for me, when we're thinking about safety and when we're thinking about family, we're thinking about how do we inspire, how do we help young people build aspirations, how do we help young people to both name but also to overcome some of the challenges that have emerged. And I just noticed Jade Patel's in that waiting room. She's done quite a lot of work with young parents and has got some insights as to how we might do that. Hi, Jade. So as I said, children and young people really differentiated being safe and feeling safe. For kids, when we first talked about safety, often they talk about feeling calm, relaxed, confident that you've been protected. As we'll talk about more, children and young people really felt safety was connected to relationships and confidence that adults and organisations will protect them. Stability, predictability, control over your life was fundamental for many kids. And again, you know, young people in care, one of the young people who presented at the Tasmanian Commission launch, you know, talked about her experience of care being a bit like sitting on a stool with a wobbly leg. She said, you know, you're kind of somewhat relaxed, but you know that at any point you could fall over because things weren't really in place and things weren't really that good for her. So she talked about that she could only feel safe if there was that sense of stability and predictability. And lots of young people talked about the fact that to be safe, they needed to be empowered and to support and to take a role in keeping themselves safe. So here's some quotes from young people. I won't read them all out. The first young person says safety is around, lack of safety is where your heart starts pumping and you get sweaty hands like I've got now, where you're just not able to be calm and relaxed. This is a map of the life of a young person who was in a family experiencing family violence. We asked her to think about her life and when she felt most safe and least safe. I won't go through her whole story, but she said that when she was quite young, she lived in a family where things were viewed. She felt incredibly connected to her mum and to her dad and to her little brothers. She was in a neighborhood where everyone looked out for each other. She went to school and felt incredibly loved and supported. But things went downhill after Dad was given a diagnosis of cancer, and eventually passed away. And she said that, in reflection, that had a huge toll on her and her family. She said that Mum wasn't coping particularly well, and her mental health declined significantly. To take the edge off, in Katie's words, Mum started to take some drugs, and started hanging out with a crowd that didn't really provide Katie with that sense of safety and community that she'd had in the past. Throughout her life, where the S is there is where Katie was removed from her family. She said although things weren't great at home all the time, because there was violence, there were a number of people who'd come in and out of the home who were both violent to her and to her younger brothers and to her mum. She talked about the fact that at least when she was home, she had those relationships. She felt like she was connected, and that during that time in care, she didn't know what was going to happen next. She was scared for her brothers. And although there were lots of adults in her life, family violence services, family support services and the like, she said that no one really ever talked to her about what she wanted and what she needed. She tells a story about the time just leading up to when she was removed. And she said that she had got a part-time job at the local pizza place. She was only 13 years old, but the guy, the owner at the pizza place said, this is a kid who needs some help, so we'll give her some hours just to sweep the floors and to pack, the pizza boxes and all those sorts of things. Cass was, sorry, I call her Cass. The other pseudonym we've been using is Katie, so my apologies for that. She talks about the fact that often she knew where things were going to play out in her family. She knew that on Wednesdays, say that was the day that Mum got a Centrelink payment. She knew that was the day that everyone would come over and have a big party. So it was the day that she felt really unsafe, and she was really worried about her younger siblings. So she'd often go and stay with her grandparents on that day and bring her brothers with her. On the other days, she knew that probably Friday or Saturday things might get a little bit awkward at home, where people were coming down and getting a little aggressive. So she would take her brothers to the pizza shop. And she recalls one day when she was walking home from her job. It was about an hour walk, and she didn't have enough money for the bus. But she was walking along the road with her two younger brothers, and she said, it started to rain, and both of them were, all the kids were incredibly drenched. And she said that her younger brother, kept seeing all these cars pass by. Sometimes people would slow down and rub a neck and see, look at these three kids who are walking alone, but no one would ever stop. And he said, am I invisible? Are we invisible? Can't they see us? And Cass said, well, actually, it's like that. Was our experiences of childhood, that we felt invisible, that people looked at us and saw us, but didn't give us an opportunity to say, this is what we want and this is what we need. And rarely did they ask them or provide them with support that they would like. Children and young people also told us that they felt not only invisible in the relationships that they had with the community around them, but sometimes invisible in policy. In that study, I sat down with a young man who talked about his experience of family violence, and he said, what are adults and organisations and what are governments doing? And I said, well, actually, I've got this the first action plan under the National Plan to End Violence Against Women and Children. you can have it if you like, and you can see that actually adults are taking it seriously, and that we're worried about children and young people. Later that night, I got a phone call from the young person who said, "What are you talking about, Tim? I can't see me in here at all. In fact, all I can see in here is some reference to a new program that's going to be in place for young men so that they don't become offenders when they're adults." He said, "But there's nothing in there for me for now. You know, there's nothing in there about how I can restore my relationship with my mum. There's nothing in there about how I deal with waking up in the middle of the night screaming as I have flashbacks. There's nothing in there about the guilt that I feel about when I was removed and placed into care, but my little brothers were at home and got hurt. There's nothing in there for me. We're invisible." He said, "This is shit and I'm not in here. The only thing I can sees me as someone who's going to be an offender in the future." So his call was for us, when thinking about how we construct children and young people in policies, is to name children and young people, to be really clear that we actually take their concerns seriously and that we're going to wisely act on them. Now, how are we going for time? 37, excellent. So in the work that we did with Katie and Andrew and others, we tried to get a sense from them as to what safety meant. And as you can see, there's parallels with earlier work that we've done. It's about a bodily response, stability and predictability, but also children and young people felt that they needed to have adults around them who could help them develop their own protective strategies. Now, they were really clear. They were really clear that it shouldn't be the responsibility of kids themselves to protect themselves from harm. But they also felt that it was important for adults to at least acknowledge that and to give them some strategies to find trustworthy adults to whom they could turn and get help when they needed it. Children and young people in that study and future studies also talked about the fact that it was really important for adults to understand how living in a family experiencing violence or abuse or what have you were active agents in what was going on. So they were taking a part. So we heard from kids often that they would stand between mum and dad when there was an altercation, that they were the ones who hid their younger brothers and sisters so that they weren't hurt or harmed, that they took a role, and that some of the young people found that when they went into the care system in particular, that adults either weren't aware of that or actively discouraged it. Andrew, again, talked about a scenario where he was placed in a residential care unit with his younger brother, and his younger brother would have nightmares at night. So Andrew, said, "Come and sleep in our room," in the way that we've been doing for years and years and years. But he said he understood why the resi care workers were worried about him having a younger child in his room. But he said, "This is my family. This is how we keep safe. We want adults to understand that. We want adults to appreciate what we're doing and to help us to find different ways to protect ourselves and others and to cope with the trauma that's reflective of our own experiences." As I said, stability and predictability were really important for children and young people, and I won't go into that more now, except to say that for children and young people, many of them said that that because of their early experiences, sometimes when they were in a space that was safe, it felt incredibly unsafe, because at least when you were in a scenario where you knew that things were going to happen or that could happen, that you could predict that and that you had some strategies to deal with it. But when everything was safe and everyone seemed warm and fuzzy and what have you, this sense of instability or unpredictability actually came to the fore, and they recognised the irony of that. Mindful of time, so I'll keep going forward. Children and young people, when we're thinking about families and safety, also told us, though, that although their families experienced challenges, they experienced a lack of safety with workers who didn't appreciate what was going on. I'm hoping it's not the case here in Victoria, but children and young people in other places talk about situations where workers tried to bond with them by paying out or or dismissing their families. One young person said, you know, workers would come to me and say, "Oh, you're such a good kid. I can't believe that any parent would hurt or harm you." And she's going, "Get stuffed." You know, this is my family. She said, even though things were bad at home and I had to leave, you know, you've got that bond. They're there. You have this longing, you know, to be with them, for things to get better, to be a family again. So even though you're all fuck them, they mean something to you, and people need to know that. Builds on that. And you kind of hope that your family feels the same. It really pissed me off that workers tried to connect with me by paying out my mum. How can anyone ever give up a kid like you? That was fucked. She didn't have the skills, you know, and fuck them. And they didn't ask about that, and fuck them that they paid her out, and fuck them that they tried to use her as a way to get to me. How do they work with families? They make things worse. So for children and young people, safe work, or child safe work with them, was about recognizing the challenges that their families were experiencing, but also recognizing incredibly important part that family has in the lives of these children and young people, and to build them up, to offer supports to families so that they can be there for their kids and provide the kids with the supports that they need to grow and develop, but to do it in a way that acknowledged and built on strengths rather than focused on problems. For children, young people from Aboriginal, but also broader other cultural groups, you know, cultural safety was also incredibly important. You know, they wanted to feel affirmed. In the work that we did, that I mentioned at the start, with young people in out-of-home care, Aboriginal young people in out-of-home care, they said, you know, we need for our culture to be seen as something that's protective. Too often we're constructed as poor kids, or kids who aren't getting their needs met because we're Aboriginal, and that's not true. That's not how it is. You know, our culture is what drives us, a key part of identity, and it's where we get strength and have the space to heal and grow. Was very upset, I suppose, or disappointed in working in the Tasmanian context, because about 2/3 of the young people we met were Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander, and we asked them about cultural safety and what things workers were doing to help them feel culturally safe. And none of the young people could identify anything that was being done. So I think we have a long way to go. Young people instead said, I didn't feel really represented or supported in terms of my cultural identity. I wasn't even asked if it was something that I wanted, or if this was something that I valued about myself. It wasn't until I had been mentioning parts of my culture to staff that there was a topic of conversation. So we need to get better. We need to learn more about how we can support Aboriginal children and children from other cultural backgrounds to really draw on culture as a source of safety. So what does this mean in regards to our work around child safety and the like? One of the key things that children have told us right from the start is that safety is very much around relationship. They want to be surrounded by trusted adults. They were quite concerned that they believed that as a result of the Commission and other issues related to child abuse and harm, that lots of adults were scared now about having relationships with children and young people. And I saw it play out myself. Just the other week, I was at the local shopping centre, and there's a child who was obviously lost and was really quite upset. And all these adults were standing around this little girl. And you could see there was a bit of apprehension. You know, can I jump in? Can I ask the child if they're okay? How will other people interpret that? We need to get over that. We need to ensure that children are surrounded by safe adults. Yes, absolutely. Adults can be a source of harm for kids, but also we can be a source of great safety, and together we can protect them from harm. In the work that we did for the EPIC project, looking at ethical practice, we found that there are a number of things that we can do in our everyday work that can build children's sense of safety, well-being and happiness. One of the key things that came out really clearly for children and young people was that feeling like you're cared for, that you belong, really fosters and engenders a sense of safety amongst them, particularly when times are tough. My worker is awesome. She's been with me since I've been in this placement, and we had ups and downs when I first came in, and I wasn't well behaved, but then we ended up getting along because I knew she wasn't going to go. And I knew that whatever I did, she wasn't going to leave, because she knew and she needed to be to be there to help me. And then I ended up respecting her because she respects me. Children, young people talk about one of the issues that they have with the sector is that they engage with a good worker and the worker leaves. In fact, one young boy I remember talking to said, you know, the toughest thing is that I get a new worker, you know, every couple of months. And he said, you know, it feels like dad's walking out on me again. You know, so there's a sense of rejection that some of our kids have. So as a community, we need to go, how do we help kids build those relationships? How can we ensure that they're enduring? But also, how do we help young people, if we've got a good connection with them, to find others who can demonstrate that care that's so important for children, young people and families. Young people also identified practices that really focus on their rights, focused on demonstrating to the kids that we respect them, that we see the value in them, and that they, as humans, have rights to getting supports that they need, have rights to have their say, have rights to a standard of and quality of practice that is available to them because they are citizens within their communities. Children, young people talked particularly about wanting to have some choice. They wanted to have some freedom. They wanted to feel like adults had high expectations for themselves and the work that they did. They also talked about the fact that they wanted to work in solidarity. One of the phrases that we use a lot now in the child safe work came from young people who said, we want to be working in alliance with adults. We want adults who are allies, who don't take over, who don't try to solve things, but who walk alongside us. So that sense of solidarity, I think, is really important. Safety, I think, for me, is what I feel is a paramount thing, says one worker, that they're nurtured, that they're helped out, that they're heard, that they have a voice, that their opinion counts, and they get to help with decision-making around big things in their lives. So when we're thinking about what sorts of things we can do to ensure that kids feel safe, happy and well, it's about thinking about what do young people, children, young people need to feel like they've got some control in their lives and that we're walking alongside them. So these are some things, and I'll share them after the presentation today, but that really came up as types of practices that children and young people really valued and could both improve their sense of safety, happiness and wellness. So having staff that they can trust, having that sense of belonging, that they feel like their contributions are celebrated rather than being dismissed or discouraged. For us to have a us together mentality, that we're doing things with rather than doing for. So what does this mean for our work? Children and young people were quite cynical, I think, about the notion of child-safe organisations because they felt that although it was really important for us to have a focus on reducing institutional child sexual abuse, they thought there are things that were just as important, if not important, more important for them. They felt that there needed to be more discussions about family and domestic violence. They felt that there needs to be more conversations about abuse that was going on at home. They wanted, you know, for schools, for example, to be a place where adults would take notice and go, actually, it seems like things aren't okay. What can we do to help? How can we support you? How can we empower you in different kinds of ways? Children, young people talked a lot about bullying and harassment in schools in a whole range of different settings and said, you know, adults are really hopeless at this stuff. And maybe we shouldn't be talking about it in a study for the Tasmanian Commission of Inquiry, for example, because it's not about child sexual abuse, but reality is that, you know, when we see teachers and other adults failing to protect kids from bullying, you know, we think, well, if something big like child sexual abuse was occurring in their life, can we really trust these people? Are they really taking it seriously? Other young people were really frustrated that although young people have been raising issues around bullying and harassment for, you know, 20, 25 years, and we see that in, say, the Mission Australia survey, that adults really weren't taking that seriously. So they also wanted to be empowered and to have, as I said, those trustworthy relationships. They wanted adults to who are confident in talking to children and young people. Lots of kids said that adults, the reason why adults aren't good at this is because adults don't like to talk to kids who are in pain, or adults don't like talking to kids if they can't find a quick fix solution. And they said, that's not good enough. We need adults who are going to sit with us and say, maybe I can't help you deal with this, or maybe I need to find someone else who can, but to reassure them, to reflect back to them that, yes, your concern is significant for you, and that I'm going to work with you to find a solution. So feeling safe was an essential part of that. And we've talked about many of these already. Ultimately, for children and young people, a child-safe organisation is one where they feel respected, where they're educated, where they know what's going on and how organisations are responding, that they're confident in themselves, but also confident in adults and organisations, that they value kids and they worry about kids, and that they're going to step in and protect them from harm, and that they have those alliances. In the work that we did for the Tasmanian Commission, we worked quite a bit with young people in out-of-home care and in youth detention. And the feeling that we had was that although it's important for us to have a focus on child-safe organisations, if we don't surround child-safe organisations with child-safe systems, things aren't going to improve for children and young people, particularly those who are most engaged with the system. You know, children and young people talked about the fact that, you know, again, although they'd been removed due to abuse that had occurred in their families, there was nothing in the system that helped them to heal and grow. They felt that they were kind of just being held in the system until they became adults, and it was at that point that they would be given opportunities to talk about what had happened, to start coming up with strategies to cope with what happened, and that wasn't okay. And we see, you know, a system failure, both in Tasmania, but we've seen it in other jurisdictions as well, where kids in care and detention in particular aren't provided, you know, camp support and the like, because the programs are developed in such a way that they're not provided when kids aren't in stable placements or stable situations. And for many of our kids, that may never happen. We also recognise that, you know, unless we invest in workforces, unless we ensure that we've got enough money to recruit the best people, to train, support and supervise them, then some of the challenges that kids are facing will continue. I won't go into the others except to say that I think one of the things that children and young people told us was that their safety was often compromised because different parts of the system weren't working together. In another piece that we did looking at family violence, the intersection of family violence and disability, young people with disability who'd experienced family violence and their families told us that they weren't able to access survivor support or counselling or what have you, because, say, NDIS said, well, this is it's an issue of trauma, it's not a disability issue, so go over to the family violence area and they'll support you. The family violence sectors often said that they weren't equipped to work with young people with disability, and child protection said, well, this is too big an issue, we're not quite sure how we're going to deal with it. So we need to come together and say, okay, how as a system can we support our young people and families to recover and to heal, but also to experience, you know, this childhood that we want all kids to experience, where there's a lack of safety concerns, and every opportunity for them to heal and grow. Fundamentally, children and young people also told us in every single study that they wanted to play a part in their protection. They wanted to have their say. They wanted to talk to adults, to policymakers. Just yesterday, a young person said, I want to meet with the Prime Minister because he needs to know how we can support young people in families where there's violence better. And we need to give young people those opportunities to do that. To ensure that that's effective, we'd argue that it needs to be built into our policies. It needs to be built into KPIs, that we're actually involving and engaging children and young people in this way. And ultimately, we need to be trauma responsive. You know, lots of young people said that wasn't their experience. A young person in Resi Care I spoke to last year said it's weird because the system, you're expected to know how trauma works, but the way that they act suggests they don't. The way they act is 6 months of therapy will fix you. As soon as you move out of that dangerous situation, the triggers are gone. But that's not how it works. That's not how a kid's mind works. That's not how anybody's mind works. It's going to linger. That's going to stay with that kid. So, as I said, you know, one of the key things that kids wanted to do was to help adults understand what they want and what they need. They want to have opportunities to work with adults so that adults can understand what some of these things, how they're experienced by children and young people, and want to be a part of initiatives that improve the lives of their peers, because that, for many of the children and young people, was the key driver for their commitment to change. If children and young people aren't involved in stuff like this, then there's no insights into the mishaps and mistreatments that happen within these institutions. Therefore, there can be no change if you're not speaking directly to victims and sufferers of what goes on. So I have been absolutely delighted, not delighted. I've been incredibly fortunate to have worked with children, young people, and workers and sectors across the system to really rethink safety and how we build it into practice. And I have to say, it's been amazing seeing how many workers and many organisations across the country are taking children's views on and saying, okay, how can we be more child-centred? How can we be more engaged? How can we have some of these difficult conversations, and how can we work with others to ensure that children's safety needs are being met? But I still think we have a long way to go, and I'm delighted both with the journal, but also in conversations like today, for us to continue to have that conversation to say, how can we do this? How can we do it well in the interests of our kids? So thank you.
Always good to come off mute. Rookie error all the time. That was incredible, Tim. I must say, it isn't until you get the opportunity to sit and look at the tools that you've created, the common sense approach in your work, that you go, like, how do we really integrate this? I mean, how does this become second nature, right? Because I think those words about sitting with kids with pain, like adults not wanting to hear it or feeling like you can't do anything about it, we should just keep saying that. I mean, it's at the core of the way we sometimes operate. I always feel, in terms of my contact with kids who've been in the care system, it's a privilege. Yeah. And when they call you on a Saturday because something's happened in their life, I mean, that's sort of how it should be. But there's a lot of should we be doing that? How should it work? All that sort of thing. I'm sure most people on the call have had those experiences. Now, we've got loads of questions. We know you love questions, and I'm going to start going through them, because really it's how we learn. So here's just a question really about, and I would say, when I think about the amazing young people in my sphere, the world is in good hands. These are really brilliant, clever young people generally in our population that are asking more of us as adults and asking more of our politicians than ever before. But Catherine asked this question about trends or areas of focus that you think are particularly important for the wellbeing of children. Now, you talked about some of them, but there might be more. How is your team at the Institute addressing these trends like this? What's coming out for you that might be a bit different and new? We had a presenter doing AI yesterday. These are very savvy kids now, whether you are in care or have had some really tough times, or whether you haven't. What's the thinking going on within the Institute?
Yeah, great, and thank you. And so I was very, very worried that I had too many slides and that I would talk too much, but it means that we've had some more time for discussion. And I'd be really keen if people have got some hints and things too, because I can sit in my office at the uni and have a whole range of deep thoughts. But really, it's those of you who are working with children, young people, and families that can provide some amazing insights as well. In regards to stuff, one of the things that I was going to talk a little bit about, but left out because I was worried about time, was one of the things that we're hearing from children, young people, is around safety and their sense of confidence in the future. People won't be surprised about that. When we hear from kids, about issues like climate change and the like. What's the world going to be like for me in the future? Academics often we talk about in terms of ontological security, which is about trust that things are going to be okay. It's about trust that our communities are going to deal with these things. It's about trust that we're going to have access to some solutions that will make things better for us and to the world around us. I think lots of the young people who are part of the system feel this incredibly deeply, and it's not just about issues like climate change and the like, but also in relation to where they're going to be later down the track. As I said, with that study that we did with younger parents, you know, a lot of the young people had incredible aspirations towards who they wanted to be into the future, but often had very little confidence that there were going to be others around them who were going to help them to achieve that. Now, I think we need to recognise that, you know, a sense of this fierce sense of independence, and I'm going to get there, but I'm going to have to do it by myself, can be somewhat protective. But in lots of ways, you know, I think that when we've got kids in our systems and when they're in there for 10, 15 years, that we as workers need to inspire them, that we need to help them build their dreams for the future, but also give them the scaffolding to be able to achieve that. So we've been doing some work with young people, and particularly in care around, you know, what are some of the mechanisms that give them opportunities to grow? Because unfortunately, you know, with the younger parents in particular that we spoke to, you know, some of them talked about having these huge dreams and then they'd have a setback and go, well, I failed. I'm never going to get anywhere. So I'm going to give up. We need to teach young people that actually it's okay to have missteps, that sometimes it's okay to stumble, and that there are others around them who are going to pick them up and support them into the future. So I think that ontological security stuff, I think, is incredibly important. Other things that we're doing, I didn't talk too much about young people's experience as what they want and need around education. Children, young people, you won't be surprised, I'm sure, across the country have talked about the fact that they think that they're vulnerable to abuse because no one talks to them at school around risks, and that they thought that in sex and relationship education, we should be really having frank conversations about some of the threats that are around and how they can manage it. So we're really excited to be working with NAPCAN and QUT. We're working with young people, including young people who've experienced maltreatment, to co-design some principles and some quality indicators in relationship education. So we're going across the country at the moment, talking to survivors. You know, how can we make our education better for you, but also how can we do it in a way that's trauma informed? You know, young people in the younger parents study again talked to who'd experienced maltreatment, said, you know, we talk about consent and the like in ways that make us feel like it was our fault, you know, that we should have said no, but we could never do that. So that's an exciting project that we're embarking on at the moment, and we'll keep you in the loop as to how we go. So that's a few things.
The ontological security sort of umbrella, it feels all inclusive for all young people now in terms of the way that it might feel for them both personally, but also sort of the world at large, right? So
yeah,
it's worth I mean, I often feel like we don't always understand young people within the big picture. So they are living in, you know, that's sort of the system, but they're also living in the world that's very different to the world that I thought we would be living in 2023, right? Different child.
Yeah.
So I think that it's important to keep that in mind. Now, Jade has got a great question. Jade Town. Jade, I'm wondering, do you want to make your comment and ask your question? It's much better than me asking these questions. I like to create a bit of dynamism in the Zoom room. Are you happy to speak to your comment and your question, please? Hello.
Hi, Deb.
Hello.
Hi, Jade.
Thank you for the impromptu. It was so good to hear what all. Yeah, and
Oh, sorry, Jade.
Jade, it's a bit glitchy. I'm wondering if you turned your camera off and we just had your voice, it might be a bit better.
Is that back?
Now let's see how we go now, Jade.
Okay. Yeah, I was just wondering about how monitoring and evaluation systems and KPIs can support trauma-informed practice and spending time with young people to build trust and everything.
Well, let's have it as a conversation, Jade, because I know that this is something that you're really focused on too. One of the things that we're doing with for the ACT government is working with groups of children, young people, and families to get them to co-design quality indicators of support. So we're actually saying to them, you know, what in addition to all the things that governments have to report on, you know, the reduction in numbers of kids in care and the increase in reunifications and the like, tell us what are the things that we should be looking out for? What are some of the things that we should be measuring? You know, for children and young people, it's about going, you know, that I feel like there are people around me who are going to protect me, that families at a very basic level, it's pretty massive. Young people have said, you know, one of the indicators should be that my time in care is better than what life would be like if I wasn't. So it's about having some of those conversations with children, young people, and families, and them playing a part in determining what a good outcome is for them. Jade, what's your thinking? What are some of the insights you'd have?
Well, it's something that we're looking at the moment in the record keeping project that I'm working on. But I think that building those kinds of indicators into the systems that we use for monitoring and evaluation has always been difficult because of the difficulty in quantifying those kinds of relational sorts of things. But I think all the work that we're seeing around the cultural therapeutic ways through BACA and in conversations about Indigenous knowledge systems and things like that are really helpful in sort of systematising things that are basic kind of human behaviours and qualities that are the things that help people, you know, through those difficult kinds of experiences. But yeah, I think the webinar from Claire Baker from DFFH earlier this year was really interesting too. But definitely, I think that we can merge through co-design kind of efforts, those kinds of relational indicators and the maths that we need to sort of see things from that higher level, and for governments to get the accountability that they need. I think it's definitely possible, but maybe involves working across different disciplines as well. Maybe we can't do the maths all here. But yeah, there's scope, I think.
Thanks, Jade.
Fantastic. What a great exchange. Thank you so much, Jade. So I am quite interested from those on the screen, what you're doing in this space. You know, I know that Tim's stuff will resonate. I know lots of you are doing things in this space to sort of engage with young people and children that you care for. I'm interested to hear from you in the chat about what you might be doing. I know that people like Nick Halfpenny and Dana and a whole lot of other people are here with us today. I think Tim and I'd be really interested to hear from you in the chat about what you are doing, and we can collect that up. But Tim, I while I've got you here, I want to ask you a question about the Royal Commission, because we're all interested in. I think we have seen transformative change as a consequence of it in so many ways. It's almost a shame we're not measuring it, because I think that it has fundamentally reshaped us as a country. What are your insights? Because I think that there's a long way to go, don't get me wrong, because we're still having a conversation about integrating the way we work with young people and children so they're leading rather than, you know, sort of, you know, following or getting left behind. What's your insights in what might have changed in the last few years? Because I mean, clearly at the centre, it was our blueprint. It was our guiding light, really. And when I think about all the work that's been done by yourselves and your colleagues, and I think about just the maltreatment study, for example, we wouldn't have had those things. We wouldn't be talking about so regularly, unfortunately and sadly, in the news when we do see predatory behaviour towards children in children's settings. But it's much more in our face now when it happens, and then there's a whole analysis about what went wrong and what do we need to do to sort of not allow that to happen again. What are your reflections? Because you're on the inside of this. You, as a researcher, you've seen some of the change. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it'd be lovely to hear from Kathy and others too.
Yeah.
I apologise if the presentation underplays the incredible value of the child safe standards and principles and the like, because I think I agree with you. It has been transformatory, and it's also encouraged us to have conversations about discomfort. Like, a lot of people are saying, oh, you know, we're required to do this, but what does this look like? What does this feel like? How do we do this? And how do we work in a way that is a little bit countercultural? You know, we want to protect kids. We want to empower kids, but what does that look like? What does that feel like? And what do we need to do? So, you know, those conversations, I think, have been invaluable. And also, I mean, although it was incredibly traumatic for all of us, I think, to live through the Royal Commission and more recently the TAS Commission, to hear the extent of abuse that has occurred in institutions. But I think in shining a light on that, it's given us an opportunity to go, okay, this has happened, and what can we do to change things? I think that it's a challenge because, as you know, as children and young people told us, focusing primarily on institutional child sexual abuse has meant that some of the other concerns that we have for kids may have been sort of set to the side for a bit. But I think now that we're in a place where, you know, the first round of implementation of the standards and the like has sort of played out, we now need to take stock and go, how have we gone? What can we learn from? But also, how can we push further? You know, kids are still telling us that if they've experienced abuse or neglect, either in institutions, but more likely outside of institutions, that adults still find it really tough. I was talking to a young person just the other day who said, you know, I told my school about some abuse that was happening at home, and, you know, all the adults said the right things and did the right things and called the police and the social workers and what have you. But then after all that had been done, I had to go back to the class where everyone knew that something wasn't quite right. And all the teachers and all the adults who'd been incredibly supportive kind of now looked like they were freaking out. They didn't want to have conversations with me because they didn't want to hear more, or you know, when things didn't play out the way that they thought they might in regards to the perpetrator, they went, well, it's too hard a conversation to say this hasn't played out the way that we'd like it to. So they stopped talking to me. And this young person said, you know, I never felt more alone. So it's about going, how do we as a system go, okay, this is what we need to do to protect our kids. This is what we need to do in regards to responding to them. And mentoring, reporting, all that is important, but it's also about going, okay, how do we re-embed our kids? How do we foster that sense of safety? And I have to say, we really do need to do a lot more work for children and young people who've experienced maltreatment to give them opportunities to heal and grow. You know, we still haven't got enough funding for services for young survivors. And as a result, you know, I think we've got lots of kids who are hurting that we really need to support in a different kind of way.
Yeah, and it's that sort of life trajectory stuff, isn't it, Tim? So, you know, young people who become mums, the whole, and the maltreatment study really lays this out nice and clearly for us in terms of services that really need to be in place, as not everybody reveals very early what might have happened to them, but as they go through life, the opportunity for them to get the services they need when they're ready really stuff, but we just don't think that way, or the system doesn't think that way.
And just on that, Deb, can I just jump in? One of the things that young people in particular, young survivors in particular, caution us against is they believe that all the rhetoric around the impacts of abuse and violence and what have you are about the future, about their adulthoods, and that the reason why we should be supporting them is so that they don't end up homeless or on the streets or with significant mental health issues. And they're going, actually, that's important, but we're focused on now. We need this stuff so that we can have a good childhood. We want to have this stuff so that we can, you know, restore our relationships with our families. We want to have this support so that we have good outcomes in the here and now, rather than just focusing on the future. And I don't doubt that our service responses attempt to do that, but the messaging is always about let's intervene so that we don't have a group of adults who are suffering in the future. It's about let's intervene now so that kids who have experienced those things experience a positive childhood now, here and now.
Thank you, Tim. Now, look, I just want to point people to the incredible resources that are in the chat that Maria has popped up there. All of Tim's resources. There's some great work being done by Knox, the One Talk at a Time campaign, that a number of us have been involved in, that is incredible. And these are pieces of work that the Royal Commission signalled were going to be really important. I mean, we know they've taken a little bit of time, but, you know, sometimes we're not ready, right? We're ready. Yeah. Here it is. And they're remarkable resources that everybody can use. And it goes to the heart of Tim's points about, yes, we need to still focus on institutions, but we now know that children are getting harmed every day in other settings, in family settings. And so this isn't about judgment. This isn't about blaming adults. This is about saying we've just all got to do better, so that we are more aware of what we need to do, how we need to be more protective, but also how we need to respond when things go wrong. Because sometimes parents don't know what to do when things go wrong for their children either, and we need to support those parents to be able to do that. So there's lots of resources in the chat. We will send those out to you as well, so that you can get access to those, particularly if you don't or have them all in one place. But I'd like to bring Kathy into the conversation a little bit here. She mentions the DICE project in the chat, but comments from you, Kathy, about the role that the Royal Commission has played. Because for me, the link between Tim's presentation and the Royal Commission are absolute, because it is about voice and empowerment and hearing from children and young people, hearing from survivors. Did you want to make some comments? Because I think that you've been right in the thick of this as well.
Well, I think that we can't, like you said, Deb, we can't underestimate the importance of the Royal Commission. There's a whole lot of stuff that rippled out from there. I mean, one of the things was they showed us how to do the issues in relation to research alongside the Royal Commission, so that Leah Bromfield and others, you know, with Tim, led a whole lot of research alongside the Royal Commission, where, you know, they were building the knowledge at the same time as having the Royal Commission. That was incredible modelling. I think the project also that worked with social workers and lawyers to look at how you build trauma-informed workplaces was also a really important modelling. And I don't think that we would have the whole new centre for research on child abuse unless we'd had the Royal Commission. And then, of course, there were the voices of young people and the way in which, again, it was modelled about how to surface those. I think it's been incredibly important. I think that we're moving on also to all the issues around child sexual exploitation and what a different space that is to understand, to work constructively in the different ways in which, you know, the perpetrators of the persons of interest involved in child sexual exploitation are kind of way ahead in terms of our steps and how, you know, how we do more in that space that actually is effective, I think is really a very, very important space.
look, it's made me think about we need another longer conversation about the impact of the Royal Commission over the coming months and years, because as we all do in travelling the world, I'm really proud of it. I think it's a standout piece of work that the world is quite needs and is very envious of. So I feel proud of this country and proud that we were able to do it, but really proud of working with our researchers, because I think the partnership with our researchers and the sector is incredibly powerful in a way that we might not see elsewhere. And you, Kathy, and you, Tim, are standout partners in that regard. So together we learn, and together we've been able to go forward. So look, what I'm going to do now is we've really hit the actual 10:20 mark, which is perfectly on time. I just want you all to thank Tim. It's been just a fantastic presentation, and I know that for a lot of you, you use Tim's work, but I think that what we're saying here, we've still got a long way to go. And to have Tim at the front of this on day 2 talking about these issues just shows how important it is for all of us. And you'll be hearing more from Tim anyway, because, you know, journal, etc. So can we thank Tim? Give him a round of applause. There's lots of lovely comments in the chat, Tim, if you get a chance to read them. So thank you, Tim. And
thanks.